Hello, everybody, and welcome to Coffee Class with Young Screenwriters. We are an
Welcome.
online resource and community for up-and-coming screenwriters. Today, we are talking Rings of Power,
New
and
Amazon
not
show.
yes, the Amazon show, and not whatever of the dragon, House of the Dragon.
Hot tea.
A lot of hot D, a lot of things, a lot of powerful women. I got them scrambled before, and apparently I'm not the only one. But today we are talking Lord of the
Very
Rings.
different though.
They're extremely different, but it's like for some reason my head just, I think it's the pattern of something. I'm just like, oh yeah, mash them together. But yeah, today we're going to talk about it. Is it the most expensive show that's ever
Yes.
been done?
So it was $1 billion overall from Amazon, and it was about 400 million for season one.
Oh my gosh.
600
wait.
million or something for to just get the rights to the Lord of the Rings. And what's really funny is it's Lord of the Rings the novels, so not the Silmarillion. So all of these stories that from season one or Rings of Power, anything that Amazon can produce, can only reference to things that are referenced in Lord of the Rings or the appendices for Lord of the Rings. And you notice that in the title card at the end, so the credits, they say based on Lord of the Rings and the appendices. The appendices are about 60 pages of random notes on world building that Tolkien just dumped in the back. But the Silmarillion is the entire chronology of the world, and where actually we're seeing the things. Like they can only touch on things that were referenced of the Silmarillion in Lord of the Rings, but they can't actually adapt the Silmarillion, which is interesting.
Wow. So
Legal stuff.
was that kind of like a technicality that they're like, well, we got the appendix and
Yes.
and we can use that. That's pretty funny.
So they can really use a lot of it. I mean, like there's like a paragraph that could be a whole TV show, right? And that's basically what this is. But I would have really liked personally as a fan, because I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, to see a Silmarillion adaptation, or at least parts of those stories, and we get a little bit of that, like with seeing a Valinor opening with the two trees and light, and they reference Morgoth, who stole the light from the trees. All that happened in the Silmarillion, but was only referenced in Lord of the Rings. So legally, they can only do that, but I would have much preferred this is a good topic for a show, I think, but I still think the Silmarillion is like, it has 10 Lord of the Rings worth of content. And although it's not a straight novel, and it's not as good. Like it's not a good read the same way. Like when you read the Silmarillion, the average reaction is, "What the hell did I just read?" What? Whereas if you read Lord of the Rings, it's like, oh, that was a novel with characterization, and like it works dramatically and stuff. But
well, tell his estate to get it together then. Like
yeah,
geez.
So it's very interesting. I actually really like this show. I think I've only watched the first 2 episodes. It's interesting. Like as a TV fan, as a screenwriter, like I understand the adaptation impulse to make better storytelling decisions for the medium, right? And television, as opposed to a movie, has different dramatic needs and constraints, right? And the design of Rings of Power, the choices they've had to make, the changes they've had to make from source material are all ones to create more of a conflict relationship dynamic. Like, for example, the conflict between Galadriel and Gil-galad, the king of the elves, is totally manufactured for the show, as is her relationship with Elrond, and her whole motivation of her brother Finrod dying in the First Age and wanting to avenge him, or like sort of seek out evil, totally also was not really what her motivation was at the time. But it makes better sense for the TV show to give her like some good dramatic stuff, like, oh, I have to, I'm stuck between my allegiance and my desire to, my personal desire for vengeance, and sort of the fiduciary duty of like, you know, whatever. And like her having to go back west would never really happen. But like dramatically for TV shows, like, okay, you're going to make a TV show like Galadriel, you got to give her something. She's not just perfect. She's
Yeah.
just a perfect character who came out of the womb, like with, you know, all the power and all of the wisdom, right? And you can't make a TV show about inhuman characters. You have to make a TV show about human characters. One of the weird things about Tolkien is the elves aren't really that human. And the smartest thing about Lord of the Rings, the novel, is that it doesn't really spend that much time on the elves. It spends all its time with the humans and the hobbits and the dwarves, who are really fucked up and they're really human. And this show has to make the elves more human, and that's really not in the mythology, but also makes for a better TV show.
They also make them human by giving them fugly haircuts. That
yeah, although her hair is great.
Her hair is fantastic. But there was an amazing thing that Theo showed us where it was like, this is why everyone thinks the elves look weird. And it's basically that they're missing their sideburns. And when you see the sideburns photoshopped on, you're like, wow, they do look like elves. You know? But until then, it's just like, I don't know why this is off, but it's off. And it's because they have no sideburns. Can't live like that.
This is a great question, Theo. Did anyone really enjoy the Silmarillion? Only if you're obsessed and you get to the third reread and you already know the story. Reading the Silmarillion, already knowing it, is way better than just reading it cold. Like, reading it cold is not going to be fun. It was actually never really written to be published.
Is it like a wiki kind of a thing?
Yes, but it's like also it has a lot of poems, has a lot of like mythological stories. It's not a novel in any traditional sense, but the dramatic situation, it could make, there are like 1,000 TV shows you could do with that. So, but I also know that from a marketing point of view, Amazon acquires this extremely expensive, property, and their marketing team says, okay, what recognizable characters are we going to use? Well, the Silmarillion has almost no recognizable characters whatsoever. They're like gods and like the ancestor. Galadriel is in the Silmarillion, but like she's a minor character. I mean, not as important, or at least in the first age. And you think, well, do I spend $1 billion on a show with no recognizable characters, or do I spend $1 billion trying to shoehorn as many recognizable characters as possible into my expensive show, especially if it's the first show you're doing? It's interesting. I personally really liked it. Yeah, sorry.
I would say maybe they'll get to do, if they continue to do a good job and actually deliver us a good full season, maybe they'll get access to the
spend another $500 million to the Tolkien estate.
Because they need it.
The Tolkien estate hates the adaptations in general, for a lot of reasons. One was they didn't make a dime from the movies.
Didn't they sell the rights because they had to pay taxes? Was that these people?
The old man, the writer, had a tax bill in 1970, and he sold the film and TV rights to cover it.
Well, it's his own fault.
Oh, it's totally his fault. Yeah, but his kids have been like dying inside for all these years because they didn't get it. Well, their book sales went up, so I'm not crying for the Tolkien estate. They are rich as fuck, but they have like some personal. Well, Christopher Tolkien really hated the movies, and he hated the commercialization of it because he thought that it cheapened the work. And yeah, that's true. But also, don't you want a good, engaging TV show? I think it's always true of any adaptation. An adaptation, once it's commercialized, once it achieves huge worldwide success, once you have action figures, literary, like, that precious, special, imaginative feeling you have with your mind in a book, it is lost. It's just a different type of. You're not going to.
I see that the same as like saying like I only like this band when it was like indie. It's like.
But it's a more respectable version of that because like for example, Gandalf in your head when you're a child reading the book is like very special, or is whatever it is you bring to it. And the moment you see an action figure in a Walmart, it goes from being a precious thing from your core memories to an action figure in a Walmart. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad, like, I'm not like anti, commercialization stories or like success or whatever. I just think it's true that it changes it.
This is true, Michelle. I saw so much Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, all this kind of stuff in like Sky Mom magazines on airplanes. I remember that very vividly. And I was always like, this is the best part. I just sit there and look at wands and like rings I didn't care about. Yeah, I mean, I just kind of think that it all adds together and makes something even more special, but that's just my stance on that. But so I came to this as someone who has not read Lord of the Rings. I think I read The Hobbit, but it was like way above my grade level and I suffered. And then I've seen like, I tried to watch the Hobbit movie and fell asleep.
Those are rough movies. They're not good.
Yeah.
They're not good. They're not good.
And I watched the Lord of the Rings, the other ones in Spanish. And I was young and only retained a little. And then I watched the first Lord of the Rings for Adam, and I got through like a little bit. Right.
Half of it, you said.
I got through half,
Carl said half of it.
But I have seen the whole thing. Like I know I know how it goes. But at that point I didn't. But so yeah, I was coming to this from a position of like completely like yeah, I have no emotional attachment to this material. I hope they do a good job and tell me a good story, and then I'll be happy. And I was really happy. So like, I don't know the Silmarillion. I don't really know, like, I don't remember Galadriel particularly much. Like, I don't remember these people. I know, like, I knew the name, like, Sauron or whatever his name is. I don't know. I knew these names, and I was like, ooh, that's bad. Like, ooh, that's...
Do you know who the target audience of this show is? People like
me?
you.
Yeah.
They don't give a fuck about what people like me think. They want young people who've maybe seen the movies or know what they want. People who like know what Lord of the Rings is, but don't really know it because they want new fans. They want to expand. They want to get younger people into it. So they don't give a fuck what. They know I'll watch it. You know, they don't care. They don't care. So they're designing the show to have as wide a net as possible. Also, it's spent $1 billion on something. You want it to be as wide as possible. If you make something that's just for that's hyper consistent and with the source material, you might diminish it in the adaptation.
Yeah, it's yeah. If you're gonna do fan service too hard, then you're minimizing your fan base. You're minimizing the audience to the fan base, and you can't do that.
Well, there's a difference between like faithful adaptation and fan service, right? Like,
true.
Because you could say, like, Lord of the Rings, the original films, the Peter Jackson films, they're pretty faithful, but they make a lot of changes to make it a better movie, right? Mm-hmm. They aren't totally precious with the material. Like they're making the best movie they can with the source material, with all being respectful. And there isn't, I wouldn't say a lot of fan service. Actually, no, that's true. There is fan service in there too. Obviously, like they put a lot of details from the books that didn't have to be there. They put a lot of stuff, and people did appreciate that. But I think a more useful way to think of it as a writer, or like if you're creating something, if you ever have to adapt a well-known work, if any of us has to, I think a more useful mind space is less, oh, I got to put in goodies for the fans, and more, how real can I make this so it's believable?
Yeah, for sure. But I do think it's like, this is the point, Michelle. It's knowing what parts you can indulge the audience. So it's like, I agree with that. It's like you want to tell a really, really good story, but especially if it already has a fan base, it's like, okay, what are the things that are gonna make everybody happy when they like that they're gonna be glad they finally got to see on screen. I know, like, for example, it reminds me of Shadow and Bone because I hadn't read the books before we watched it, but I remembered like trying to read about it going up to it, and I saw a lot of comments of people being like, I always wondered what the robes looked like, and then I finally got to see the robes, and I really like what they did. And so there is some like playing with what have the fans been imagining? Like, what do they want to see, and showing them that, but also giving them something that is best for the screen, which Shadow and Bone mashed 2 series together, right? Or mashed 2 books together that didn't really happen at the same time to make them
what
happen.
What it did is it adapted Shadow and Bone, but took a sequel series and took the characters and presupposed them into the first book, even though that plot line was imaginative, because I'm sure they want to make a sequel season of that book, but they just didn't use the plot at all. So it wasn't that they combined the books; they took the characters and put them in the first book, which is weird.
But yeah, I think that that's a good example, though, of like saying, okay, we want to be respectful of the material, but we also want to make sure that we keep this interesting and that we give the fans a little something. We help them see what they've been picturing in their heads, and we set ourselves up to do cool things in the future.
And the best part about that show was the invented stuff. Like, the actual protagonist of the book was like, her whole plot line was like dull as nails for me. But I loved the new character, the characters from the sequel books. I thought they were great. I was like, why can't we just do a story about these boobs? One thing I did like about this adaptation, just visually, I just have to talk about, because you can't not talk about how gorgeous it is. It's so well made. The design, not just the design, but like just it's just every shot is a fucking painting. There's none of that TV cheapness, although there is TV design. Like, for example, shot proportions in Conversation are lots of face.
Oh my god, lots of eyes.
Lots of eyes, lots of face. Because it has to work on a small screen. So they've shot this so it looks, excuse me, they shot this so that it looks good on an iPhone, and communicates. But it has that sense of scale and like texture and detail, and every single shot has. Also love how Numenor has like this Rome feel, like this very Mediterranean city. That's the city of Men on the island.
Let's see if I can.
That's what we're looking at right now.
What was it we were looking at? Good.
Yeah, that's
That's what I thought, but then I was like,
you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, like even that shot right there. That like looks like not that one, but the one with the boat. That looks like a Greek ship.
Yeah, it does.
I mean, that doesn't, not the ship, but like the outfits and the
outfits, the vibe, the vibe. Yeah.
And the show is, just also when they did give some fan service in the fact that they opened the whole show with Galadriel as one of the first elves born, playing with those kids, and we see the trees of the trees of light that held the Silmarillions. They open it up with a extremely book-centric deep dive lore thing as like an Easter egg, fan service thing, like to let you know that, hey, we're showing this on screen and this wasn't on screen and it's a big deal for you guys. But the average,
for me, I was kind of like, what are they doing?
The whole idea, in one run-on sentence, before the sun and the stars lit the world, there were just those 2 trees were the source of all light and moonlight. And the big bad guy, Morgoth, also known as Melkor, who is Sauron's boss, he was Sauron's big daddy, the real big guy. He stole the lights from the trees, which were the Silmarillions. So these precious jewels that created light, and he killed the trees. And the elves went, fuck you, we're going to go to war. Some of them, the ones who wanted to sail, like Galadriel, the Noldor, the group of elves who like sailing a lot. So I forget what my point was, but they open up with like a pretty deep Silmarillion reference.
Why don't we talk for a second about the pilot specifically and the kinds of things that happened in the pilot? So I would say that the theme of the pilot, it's all about like going home and the different things that this means to the main characters that we're following. So Galadriel in the beginning, after we have that whole thing where we find out that her brother died after he gives her like advice as a child, blah blah blah. She's out fighting, trying to find this base. She's gone beyond her mission, and she's arguing with what's his face dude about whether or not they should abandon it and go home. Right. And then is it in the pilot too where she gets presented with the opportunity, like where they're like, you're gonna go truly home?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's all about going home. So at first she's out and about and she's like, no, I'm not gonna go back to the base until I finish what I came here, what I want to do, which is prove that Sauron's coming back. And it creates a whole division. And then her reward is that she gets to go back home to like a land where everything is perfect. And she doesn't want
I think
to.
it's not so much about going home in my interpretation. It was more about, you have like the sailing reference, right? Like you have to sink, you either sink or you swim, right? Like her whole brother's thing, like you have to fulfill your mission, even if you're told you can't do it, right? Like home was more of a threat. Like it wasn't something she wants at all.
Well, I mean, like it was across all the different characters. So then also you had the elf at his base, and he's told, we're pulling out, we're going home, and he's not ready, right? And then you also have our the Harfoots, who are preparing to go on a migration. So kind of leaving
to find a new home
too. Yeah. So that's all these people that are kind of, for whatever reason, having a tough relationship with going home, where they're not ready yet. Like they have things to do. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah. And also the conflict between, like, you know, every pilot has to set up the relationship sort of dynamics of the show, or at least of the main characters. And the Galadriel Elrond relationship of, he's her friend, but he lies to her to sort of, like, you know, he believes in authority and establishment. He's on Gil-galad's side, and she is not. She believes she has a mission she has to fulfill. You know, that the fact that he's reluctant and she's passionate, you know, that's going to be that's a good relationship dynamic to push for them to grow, for him to grow. Also, I thought both of the actors did a great job playing younger versions of, even though elves are immortal and they don't age, but you know, human actors do age, unfortunately, and Hugo Weaving would have not played a good Elrond. Yes, Michelle, that was me.
Sideburns.
Michelle, unfortunately, and for everybody here, if Young Screenwriters is both of us, we can both type in that. So if
you saw the comma and you assumed it was him,
yeah,
my God,
that's so insulting.
I'm offended. Alexie's just out here like freewheeling, no commas in sight.
I have a lot of fear. That's why the comma's there.
There you go.
Yeah, so we have a few plot lines. I think there are 3 plot lines in the pilot. Sorry, 4 if you separate Elrond, the elves. But there's Elrond and his sort of conflict with Galadriel and with Gil-galad. Galadriel with her conflict between being told to go home by Gil-galad and like her sense of mission and what her brother told her. There are the Harfoots, who, you know, it's interesting, the sort of whole the comet thing, and like their sense of prophecy, and like them having to go home, and like they're prototypical hobbits, if you didn't know. Not prototypical, but like the ancestors of hobbits.
Is that,
you didn't know that,
are they not called hobbits yet?
No.
Oh.
Because the whole thing is, this happens about 3,000 to 4,000 years before.
I thought hobbits were like the species or something.
Yes, but the names change, right?
Okay.
So they're the thing about hobbits is that they're, sorry, I don't want to get down this whole road. The point is, the name changed as time goes on, as many things change in thousands of years. Although in a society where you have immortal people, knowledge is preserved more. So that's kind of an interesting concept.
Yeah.
So the elves don't change, but everybody else does.
That was fun too.
Oh yeah, and then finally, there's that plot line about the corruption with that one elf who sees, and then the cow and his sort of human girlfriend, and her son who gets that knife.
Oh yeah, them.
Yeah, that's the seed, not them, but that's the seed of corruption coming along. So that was an ending on the, I think the best scene of the pilot though was Galadriel on the ship back home, back to Valinor, and seeing kind of like the sky sort of parting to let them in. Because the whole thing, Alexie, is that the only people allowed in Valinor are the elves and gods. Humans and the Ilúvatar's children, who weren't the elves, are not allowed there. Ilúvatar. I apologize, I can't speak. But mortals cannot go. So the whole thing about the sky parting to allow them was like, okay, the
You're
dimension
crossing
is
a threshold.
Yes. And I'm sure, minor spoilers for everybody, that's going to be a huge plot point coming up later in the show of some humans being pissed off that they can't go to Valinor, that they're not allowed. That's going to be a plot point later.
I mean, I'm pissed. How dare they?
Well, there's a whole thing about like, well, why are the elves more loved by God than us? They get immortality. They never have disease. They never have to. They live forever in prosperity, and we die and we get sick, and we don't have.
That's pretty crappy.
Yes, it does suck. Yeah. And Sauron exploits that seed later on in the series. If y'all watch it.
Something that I think we would be remiss not to talk about is just briefly how stupid the racism is around this show, and how it's just like
but that's not exclusive to this. That's like all fantasy in general. There's a thing being like
it is
all depictions of medieval Europe or societies like medieval Europe in a fictional world have to look exactly like historical renderings of Europe, even though it can be whatever whatever you want. And just because Tolkien didn't imagine black elves doesn't mean, at the end of the day, who gives a fuck? I mean, it's like that's my position. Who cares? It's fantasy. You can do whatever the fuck you want. Like, let's.
I mean, yeah. If you have magic, then get over it. Like, if you're doing like a true reenactment of this one specific thing in the Middle Ages, like even then, I have a hard time completely believing that there was just like nobody but white people within like at all in general.
Well, it depends where you're talking about. In huge centers of trade and industry, 100%.
Yeah.
In Iceland, no.
Right. Yeah. But this is not remotely that. Like,
no, it's a fantasy world. It doesn't exist. Middle Earth isn't real. Middle Earth is, and who cares, right?
And I think that also someone was pulling quotes from the Lord of the Rings books that showed that they weren't even that it wasn't even necessarily that every single like people were mad that like hobbits or not hobbits were not white, and that's not even like consistent with the books. So,
I personally don't believe Tolkien did envision a world that, like, I personally think Tolkien probably envisioned everybody being white, but that's just because of who he was at that time, writing this in the 40s and 50s. But in terms of adapting it, you can do whatever you want. Like, I think, and I like the whole thing about Theo brought up. It was like, why not show the world as it is with the people who are in it on screen? Like there are good reasons why to make specific racial casting choices, and then there are bad reasons. And the bad reasons are very limited in the sense of like, oh, I want to make this specific, not even bad, but like, I want to make a historical epic about this one person. I'm going to change their race, right? Like, if you're going to do that for a specific like theatrical or dramatic reason that's compelling, then fucking do it. But if you're just doing it arbitrarily, maybe, you know, don't like give the impression to people like that that historical person was not who they were, right? But that's such a narrow point of definition. If it's just a fictional situation, who gives a fuck?
Who cares? It doesn't matter in this. Yeah,
I don't care.
Nope. But I did want to address that because I think it's such a.
But that has nothing to do with the show. This show is just being brought up by the, you know, right-wing fundamentalist groups because they're just sore about that, about everything. So they're just using the show as an example. Like, and Lord of the Rings, like I guess so many of those people don't even really give a fuck about Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. Well, they can go play that new D&D game. The not D&D game. What's it called? Star. Have you heard about? Oops, I didn't mean to click that. But yes, I agree with that, Theo. The son of the guy who invented D&D is in the center of a lot of drama right now. For
Gary Gygax's son? Yeah.
Have you not heard this?
No.
It is like worse than you can imagine. So
I'm sure.
he and I actually pulled up an article about it because I feel like it's kind of relevant to this complaint if we ended up going down this path. But it is bad. Basically, the son of the guy who made D&D, as you know, probably Adam, D&D on all the properties got bought by Wizards of the Coast.
Yep.
Right? Well, then now they haven't touched in a while. They haven't really done anything with the Star. What's it called? Star Frontiers. They haven't done anything with Star Frontiers in a while. And so out of kind of the blue, the son is doing it again, is remaking it. And
is he allowed to?
No. And what's worst, well, they are suing him, but what's worse is that it is like Carl told me, like, oh, my friend said that they're doing this. And at first it seemed interesting, but then people are saying it's like really like transphobic and racist. And I was like, huh. I wonder if it's like racist in the same way that like people are complaining about, like that people are upset at D&D for like using race to do stats and things like that, or like I wonder like what this is. You look at it and it is like horrific. Like not even like slightly like, oh, I could see why people might think that's racist. I mean, here. This is stuff that is in the game. Like, can you see that, Adam?
Yeah.
Like, I don't even want to read it out loud because it's just so bad. But they also just like randomly, they go out of their way to say that Black Lives Matter is radical. They go out of their way to
wait, in the game?
They sent out a test game to people, like a play test. And in the book, they have this thing where they have the different races. And
okay, let's we don't need to spend more time on it, but
yeah, no, but gross. I wanted to talk about it. Oops, I wanted to talk about it just because it's like, yeah, this is a problem in the fantasy space, and I am.
Well, it says more about. I mean, not to go into too much of a history lesson, sort of like what is the word fantasy and where do fantasy where do the conventions come from? Where's the, you know, when Lord of the Rings came out in the 50s, there was no such thing as a fantasy section in a bookstore. Didn't exist. And it was a huge success when it was recirculated, republished in America in the 60s, and people freaked out about it. And all of these other writers, like Terry Brooks, you know, wrote basically Tolkien clones, like other stories about elves and dwarves that had nothing to do with Lord of the Rings, just basically took what he did and published new stories. And Dungeons and Dragons is influenced by that, obviously, because they just took all the Tolkien races and like made a game out of it in the 70s, obviously. But like the fantasy shelf was invented, fantasy, the genre, was invented in the 70s by publishers to categorize all those new books, sci-fi fantasy. Like they were all put together on the same sort of section of a bookstore. So sort of like, so they could sell more of those books so that they could associate them with Lord of the Rings so they can pick up more sales. Because if people see sort of genre next to Fellowship of the Ring, they're more likely to buy that. He's like, oh, I loved this. So like they were that whole genre and that whole conception of what that means and the standards of it came about from the success of one book series and the publishing industry trying to like get similar books that were coming out to make sense of that. And when you have, games like Dungeons and Dragons, which, change hobbits to halflings so they wouldn't get sued, or, and they have elves who are tall and immortal, and like it's basically the exact same thing. You get a whole subgenre of people who are like they're creating something just based on a one-to-one copy of the thing. And when you have that, I think you have very like small-minded thinking. And I don't want to say I really like Dungeons and Dragons, but like the game, and there's a lot that's really unique and fun about it. But like a lot of the people who became very excited about it at the time, I don't know. I wouldn't. There was just an environment, I think, of very limited thinking about certain things, about like what a fantasy rate, what is an elf, what does an elf look like, that are very baked into the 70s and the 80s. And this game comes out in the 80s, and guess what? Guess who's extremely racist? America. And the game that came out in the 70s in America has racist stuff in it. Well, no shit. You have, it's, but it has less. And I don't know. The reason why I went on that whole tangent was to understand, like, okay, what are we even talking about in terms of fantasy? It's, you have people who are influenced by things, and eventually it just becomes convention, but to the point where you say an elf, you imagine Tolkien's version of an elf. But really, before Tolkien, elves were small little gremlin-like creatures.
Yeah.
From Norse mythology.
They were part of the Fae stuff, weren't they? Like, yes, they were a branch of Fae. Yeah.
Exactly. Sorry, I went on a rambling.
No, I think it's really important to talk about, because it's like when a company is going to adapt a work that is so influential, but is also has some elements of it that are problematic. It's like, how do you tread that line? How do you respect what people love about it without repeating mistakes and without repeating racism? Like, how do you keep enough? And I think that Amazon did it really well. I think that I like that there is still things that make elves distinct. They still get their fancy ears. They all still have very high cheekbones and look very elegant. But like, they've also said elves don't have to be white. Like, that's not what elves have to look like. And I think that they've done a good job.
And even when the movie came out, Christopher Tolkien, I believe, I'm going to paraphrase him, but he basically, sort of blasted the casting choices of the elves in general. And he said, that's not what my, like, Orlando Bloom in a wig is not what an elf looks like, right? Like his interpretation of his father's work was like that elves aren't even, they're like celestial beings. They don't even live on the same plane. But like, I'm like, okay, well, how do you translate to the screen in an affordable way? Well, you get an actor and you put some ears on them and stuff, and maybe put some glow, right? Like, but at the end of the day, like, there's an imaginative development where, Tolkien probably didn't imagine elves, the white elves, looking that way either, right? Like, it was a very specific thing. It doesn't really circle around to the point of like, okay, why is this the outrage piece of the week in right-wing, bullshit circles? But I think it's important to note that, like, where these things come from, and like their conception of all elves have to be white is just totally like comes out of a very limited frame of mind of like, well, they only saw white elves in D&D pamphlets and on cover art in the 70s and 80s and on, right? That's just what they saw in their frame of reference. But like, what is an elf anyway?
Yeah.
Like,
I remember as someone who wasn't familiar with Tolkien and things like that, when I was researching elves and fairies and stuff to try to understand more about like, okay, let's go all the way back so that I can come up with a story that's like my own take on things. I didn't know all of my understandings of fantasy I didn't know they were all Tolkien stuff, right? Like I didn't
not
know
all of it.
that Well,
to be fair, but a lot of it.
Yeah.
And he borrowed a lot from Norse mythology and other, like trolls and
for
all
sure.
of that stuff. Yeah.
There's a lot of older stuff where like, I mean, I was reading about there's fairies in like basically every culture, depending on like how you want to describe them. So it's definitely not that he just came up with it out of the blue and nobody had ever heard of an elf before. But I didn't realize
the orcs, though. He did invent orcs.
That's his?
Yeah.
I think that was the most racist one. But maybe that's a difference.
But orcs are described in the books as pale, sallow skin, which I'm not saying isn't racist, but the orcs were not a one-to-one for brown-skinned people, actually. The racist element of Lord of the Rings isn't the orcs. The racist element of Lord of the Rings are the men of the East, and who will ally with Sauron, and the whole there's problematic stuff, don't get me wrong. And also some of the language of like men of the West, right, is you could interpret that and make Nazis very happy, although he himself disavowed Nazism and despised them.
Well, I was reading about it before, and there was this thing here where it says, why do racists like Tolkien and Middle Earth? And he said Tolkien made statements against the Nazis and also apartheid, but this is not the same as being anti-racist or pro-equality. His condemnation.
I don't think any white person who existed in 1950s was anti-racist. Like, I just refuse to believe that.
Well, I mean, this statement is a little bit more extreme than I think other people might have been, where he said that he condemned Hitler for ruining, perverting, misapplying, and forever making accursed that noble northern spirit, a supreme contribution to Europe, which I have ever loved and tried to preserve in its true light. I'm not saying he's like worse than average.
He hated Nazis, which was better than the average guy who was really into northern mythology.
Yeah. I mean, it's still just interesting. I tried to read up about it before I came into this conversation.
And for sure. And to be fair, I think this is something I would criticize of Tolkien's work. This idea of the orcs being unredeemable or like being evil innately based on what they are. Like, so there are two conflicting sort of stories of where orcs come from and what they are. But basically, Tolkien made the orcs perversions of elves. Like, they used to be elves who were tortured beyond and bred with creatures and like really disgusting stuff to the point where they became like a new species. And that's really fucked up. But like the fact that it's presented as there's this horde of like monstrous creatures who want to destroy the pure elves and men of the West, it's the optics of it are not great. I will not lie.
Yeah.
But I don't think he saw the orcs as black people. That's not his intention.
No, I don't, and that's not what he's saying.
Nazis who like Lord of the Rings do, and that's fucked up.
Yeah, make your work so Nazis can't like it. That's a good rule of thumb for now. Yeah, exactly. This is how we. Yes, indeed. Again, this is also true.
He was slightly better than Roald Dahl.
And wasn't Disney a little iffy?
Walt Disney was hella anti-Semitic.
I thought so.
He made a lot of really racist films. Tolkien's better than Walt Disney at the very least. But here's the thing, nobody's above criticism. No document of its time. Like, and listen, anytime you take something that's 75 years old, just assume it has some problems. And if it doesn't, there's something wrong with it. Like you got to interrogate this stuff, have a healthy sense of like, there are writers who I think it's so disgusting that you should never touch it. And then there are writers where it's sort of like, well, there's a lot of beauty and truth and good things. And like, one or two things that we should interrogate and talk about, And I think Tolkien's one of those writers. Like, I think, I grew up with it, so I can't forget it. I can't burn it out of my head. But like, the portrayals of Middle Eastern people in the movies and in Lord of the Rings is kind of like this monolith that was perverted by Sauron, or like went in with Sauron. Men of the South and men of the East is not great. It really sucks. It's the only problematic part of the movies personally is like, oh well, the only people the only men who go on the side of the orcs wear turbans. That's not great. That's really not good. Yeah.
Whoops. Yeah, I would say so. I don't remember that.
I can't keep saying that. Well, you didn't see the third movie.
That would be it then. Yeah.
Although they ride gigantic elephants that are like 8 times the size of an elephant, and I think that's a cool idea, of an elephant that's like the size of like a skyscraper. That's a cool idea.
Mm-hmm.
Big elephants.
Road Doll.
Wait, what did Roald Dahl say? Oh my god. That's terrible.
So bad. Yeah, I don't like. We don't have to talk about my opinions on Road Doll, but I have.
He's a great writer who apparently has some shitty beliefs.
He did like interesting things with really exploring the perspective, how adults seem to children.
Yes.
But yeah, there's a lot of problems with a lot of the stuff he does.
But
but yeah,
I think you got to approach this stuff with nuance, right? Like my personal dividing line is the work problematic? Like, is this sending a damaging message to the world? Is this hurting people? Right. And if the dividing line is no, it's great. It's, most of it is not, right. I can sit with it. Like for me, I will not throw out a work unless the work itself is personally or is in its essence communicating something that I disagree with. Because I have to assume, based on my worldview, no one is a hero and no one is a villain. You have flawed human beings who say and do messed up things all the time, right? Like that's just my personal view. Like, and when I like, do you separate the artist from the artist? Well, it depends what they did. It depends what their work is. Personally, H.P. Lovecraft, I'm not into him. I'm really not into that. That is kind of cancelable for me. Like his work itself is racist by what it is. I can't deal with it.
Yeah, I'm more willing to give up art if the artist is bad, but I do see your point that like it does depend. Like I can't just say if the person has ever done anything bad, I'll never look at it again, because that would be everyone. But it's like it's deciding what the line is for yourself and at least being conscious of it. I think that matters, and choosing and being aware. And I do think that that's a good point too about like evaluating the work itself. But yeah.
Also, this is in a historical context. Modern context is a little different. I would have a different opinion, right? Like if somebody has work that's coming out, like, and I think that they're a shitty person, will I support their new work? No, not in financial ways. Like, but if you've been dead 50 years, my money is not helping that person. Like, it's like they're not being enriched by. Like, am I going to buy the new J.K. Rowling book? No, I'm not going to give her money anymore. Right?
Yeah,
that's my opinion. Right?
I feel that.
Anyway, we're really talking about sort of political responsibility in art. We're not really talking about Rings of Power that much.
I think it matters. I think it matters to Rings of Power, but yeah. But let's pull back to Rings of Power.
Do you think it's a good show? How many?
I enjoyed it. I've seen them all. I've been watching them as they come out with Carl.
Okay, I've seen the first two, and I know where it's going. Plot.
I don't. I mean, I have like a sense, but they did some stuff where I was like, oh, that's cool. I didn't expect that because I don't know who these people are. I have seen past episode 2, I think, unless it's not out. I've seen what's out.
It is out.
Okay, good. Wait, is today? Does it come out again today?
I don't know.
Yes, because then the Hot D is on Sundays. So today,
but I gotta say, House of Dragon is just so much better. It's such a better TV show. I just and I don't even like Song of Ice and Fire as much as I like Lord of the Rings. Like, it's just this TV show is just really good. It's really good.
It's more like when I think about this show, I think of kind of like these like it's maybe it's my visual brain at work, but I think of like a very like expansive kind of like sprawling, we're gonna like wander around in these landscapes type thing. Whereas to me, House of the Dragon feels very like pinpointed. Like I know where we're going. I know what the conflict is. We're all driving towards the same thing. I think part of it is that with House of the Dragon, we're all like in the same castle, kind of, I think. Basically, like part of it is literally that we're like in one spot with everyone. So everyone's interacting and everybody's meeting everybody all the time. And there's always drama. And when someone's doing this, someone saw, and it makes it much more compact. And it's sort of depth versus complexity versus depth. We get to go deeper in House of the Dragon. And then Lord of the Rings has much more complexity. Like we get more characters doing different things, completely different missions.
But it's a wider pool, but a little shallower. Whereas House of Dragon's a smaller pool, but you can get your knees in.
Yep. And I like it. And I enjoy them both for what they are. But if I had to pick one, like if someone said to me, I'm going to take one off of your TV, I would choose House of the Dragon right now.
It's just I almost feel like this Tolkien's work really lends itself to film, like film stories. Like I don't think his work really fits week to week hourly television the same way Song of Ice and Fire does. Song of Ice and Fire is about messed up people and backstabbing and like twists and turns, and Lord of the Rings is like a sprawling epic where you like go on a journey and you find the thing and you change on the way back. It's all about journeys. It's and that's a movie for me. Like that's a film trilogy. Like the film trilogy format worked really well with at least the first book, or Lord of the Rings. But I also understand that Amazon will make way more money out of a TV show than they will a movie.
I do enjoy the movie. It's just the pace is slow. It feels like movie pace in a TV format.
Which
I guess is what you're saying.
Which is okay sometimes. It's just TV format, and a TV format is gonna punch me in the face harder. Like
which it
Succession.
Does,
Succession hits me on a way deeper level than this show does, right? And for me, House of Dragon is basically Succession, but like in Fantasyland. I mean, it is.
It's like when I was trying to remember where the House of the Dragon pilot ended, I kept just being like, wait, and so much stuff happened. And like, did we really end with her? She's the heir now? Like, and everyone's already pledging to her, like in the first episode? Is that really how far we got? And then with this one, I was like, I don't even remember what the big end point was. Like, it took me a bit. I had to go back and reread and try to be like, wait, is it?
Yeah.
Where did we end? That'd be interesting. I feel like the thing with Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones and that whole universe is that they can keep doing things, and I think that they will keep dipping into that IP for a while. I think that they'll keep dipping into it as long as they can prove that Dan didn't sabotage it, which they didn't, because people are showing up.
They proved it already. It's and they've already greenlit the second season. They got the numbers they wanted, and also people are talking about it in a really positive light, which is amazing. I remember I was talking to Carl right when about a year and a half ago, and I was right. Carl, if you're watching this, I was right and you were wrong. He said, I think Game of Thrones is over. The brand is over. There's too much bad blood. I said, they'll be back in a year. They'll win everybody over. People will forget. I didn't say a year, but like I said, people will forget the pain. They'll want a new hot show. And if it's good, people will show up.
Honestly, though, I will be so pissed if they butcher the ending twice.
They aren't, because it's finished already. Now, you might not like the ending, but they won't butcher it because of rushing.
I won't get into it, but I have heard some concerning things about this ending, and
it's not a happy ending. Not a happy ending.
No.
No one
No.
on screen has a happy ending in House of Dragon. You are not going to get your rah, oh, they got the thing, awesome moment.
Well, you know they can't, because if she takes the throne, then Dany's whole thing wouldn't really matter as much. Like, part of the deal is that Dany has to get to the throne. So, like, you understand, like, me as someone who's not read, again, like, I've not read those, or that one, whatever
you
one.
haven't read Fire and Blood, yeah.
No. I understand, like, in my limited knowledge, like, she can't get too far because then Dany won't have mattered as much. Like, she can't pave too far, but
I'll just say it is all I mean, and this is we've talked about this in the last episode, but like the whole thing is going to be a confrontation between her and her old best friend. That's all I'll say.
That makes sense to me.
It's going to be fucked up. There's some messed up stuff happens.
Somebody told me some really, like, messed up things, and I was like, I am not going to look into if that's real. But I don't like that.
We'll have to talk about after the call what your friend said. But listen, good TV is good TV. A good movie is a good movie. Like, at the end of the day, I think fandom, fan bases in general, they ruin so much good stuff. I mean, just look what happened to Star Wars in this last decade. The vile venom and like disgusting, just like, it's almost as like the fans are the people who like the thing the least, you know? They hold this precious nostalgia of the thing they experienced when they were a child. Yeah, when you were a child, everything was that you experienced that's going to be the warm and fuzzy thing.
Really,
you're never going to ever re-experience that.
We need to start getting fan bases therapy so they can work through their issues and then understand that it was not magic, but it was cool, and it can still be cool.
It's just going to be different. Like, it's never going to be as good as that childhood memory. And you know, I remember when the Star Wars, sorry to talk about Star Wars, but it's another really popular film series that's fantasy, not science fiction, fantasy. When the prequels came out, like 1999, 2001, 2003, or whatever, 2004, whatever it was, people hated them. They hated it so much. The fans hated it. They blasted George Lucas. They called him a hack. They made malicious documentaries about him, assassinating his character. Conventions hated him. He was despised. He was despised. And then guess what happened? The people who were kids when those movies came out really hated the new ones, because those were the movies they grew up with and were warm and fuzzy on. You watch Ian McGregor, Hayden Christensen when you're 5 years old, and you loved it because you were a kid. And the kids don't have the power to write op-eds. You know, angry, bitter adults do. And I'm sure the same thing's going to happen with this Disney trilogy that everyone hates. The people who were 5 years old when Force Awakens came out are going to be like, I actually really liked that movie.
I mean, I enjoyed it, but I didn't have any emotional attachment to anything else, I guess. So for me, it was
I enjoyed
fresh,
the first
and
one
I was
a lot.
like, sure.
The second one was kind of weird. The milking thing.
Like, look, I don't like remember what happened, but I remember.
Do you remember that one moment? It was just the most unnecessary moment ever. I don't care about the story, whatever. Mark Hamill takes the udder of this weird alien creature, milks it, and drinks the milk and goes, ah. And you're like, wait, why did that happen? Why did I just watch that? Why did that make it into the movie? How did that make it into this movie?
How was that a scene that people were looking at and said, I can't cut it? I can't.
I know. It's like, it was just so unnecessary. Anyway, hopefully this conversation at least touched on, did we think the question in the thumbnail is, did it work, right? Yeah, I think it worked. I think that they made exactly the show to communicate to people widely. Like, this is not a show for the hardcore fans, but this is a show with a few goodies for them, but it's mostly a show for young people who don't know Lord of the Rings that well.
Yep. And I wanted to talk briefly about a couple things we have coming up. So tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, we are doing a special announcement of a new thing we're launching and some changes that we're making to our current writer's room and our free open community workshop on the Discord. If you didn't know, every single Thursday we have a free open workshop on the Discord where you can come in and get your work read. And we're going to be announcing a schedule for that, which will allow you to bring opening pages of whatever you want and to participate in these bi-weekly prompts.
It could also just be an isolated scene.
Yep.
Doesn't have to be opening pages.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about that tomorrow and more information, but basically it's free table reads that are open to anybody. So definitely check out our Discord, which should be linked in the description, or come tomorrow at 1 p.m. and we'll talk about it. We're also going to talk a little bit about our writer's room, which is more about building your portfolio and like your voice as a professional screenwriter and what we're going to be doing there. And then also how you can get direct feedback on your work from me and Adam. That's going to be another topic. But that's only half of it, because next week we have a very special guest coming. I'm very excited. Octavia Klahar. She is a screenwriter who has shared these awesome scripts with us for her Grains of Time pilot and Uneducated pilot. She produced both an animated version of the Uneducated pilot and then a live action version of the pilot. And we're going to talk to her next week, talk about her work. I'll send the stuff around and send some links so you can watch her work. And we're going to have a conversation about the different ways that you can make your own stuff and other questions. So I hope that you all can make it, because that's going to be super, super fun next week. Awesome. So I think that is it.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.